Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Lauren. Lauren, I'm not going to act like we didn't just talk for a little bit off air, but can you introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Lauren. I am a academic tutor at the University of Sunderland in the UK. So I teach across criminology, health and social care, leadership and criminal justice, sociology, a little bit of everything. Anything where I can sort of stick my oar in and talk about crimes of the future, social harms, body image, and young people. So I've been doing this for around 2 years now, but I worked in mental health teams for around 7 years before coming into in academia and research. And ultimately long story short, I worked as a practitioner and realized that actually our health service, although it's fantastic to have a free health service, when it comes to the likes of disordered eating or body image concerns, or even sometimes just mental health overall, it's not necessarily fit for purpose and it's not always there to support people in the way it should be. And I just felt that I couldn't work in an industry where I felt like I was failing my clients, or service users, as some people would use the term. So that's when I came into research, because I thought, well, every change is made on evidence-based research. So where can I actually help to make a change? So that's when I came into doing my doctoral research, and here we are.
When it comes to a specific area, maybe that you might be interested in right now, out of all the things that you do, is there like a certain targeting thing that you see is like, because I mean, mental health is, as much as we're talking about it more, which is good, it is still kind of declining in a sense. Just when it comes to the aspect of you're having a lot more kids coming up now with anxiety disorders. I know the pandemic, that was a fear for a lot of people, just having anxiety issues, depression issues. But social media has been probably the biggest, I would say, I'm going to say gas pedal, and increasing a lot of people's anger and a lot of people's kind of, I wouldn't say awareness, but it kind of an awareness to more issues, not stuff they should be aware of, but more issues when it comes to body image, when it comes to other things that necessarily without social media or without devices, for instance, wouldn't show them those, I guess, those capabilities or these scenarios in their head. That, I mean, that's what it is. I mean, it really kind of sucks. But when you talk about like mental health, for instance, I always found it funny when I would say like, yeah, I have depression or I have ADHD. And then like someone in my family, like, that's in your head. I'm like, that's the problem, is that it's there. And then there's not really a way to get out of it. Because once you get trapped in your own head, you're kind of stuck. And it seems like there's not really a way out, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, although I've worked with young people and adults with uh, almost every medical diagnosis there is that falls under the term of mental health, I've never been sort of boxed into a corner of who I've worked with or who I've not been able to. Because I'm not trained as a mental health nurse, I was more of a welfare officer, or someone who did a variety of different therapeutic interventions. I was really fortunate that I could work with someone who would have, say, anxiety disorder or depression, or who would have a personality disorder. So I'd have a variety of individuals who I worked with. But my main sort of niche that I really enjoy looking at, because of my own experience of, is body image and eating disorders. But for me, my PhD research at the minute is looking at how social media impacts youth mental health. And although I'm using the term youth mental health, I'm actually specifically looking at body image, self-esteem, disordered eating patterns. So individuals who don't necessarily have to be diagnosed like with body dysmorphic disorder, or don't have to be diagnosed with an eating disorder. It's about their experience and about how they perceive that. So I know for myself, from being maybe 14, 15 years old, had such a bad relationship with the gym and with food, where I would eat certain food and I'd go and train to burn a certain amount of calories. to make it seem as if I'd almost punished myself for eating certain foods that I didn't see as clean or I didn't see as healthy. Um, and it wasn't until I was 2021, so about 4 or 5 years ago, so still relatively recently, that I actually took a look at this sort of yo-yo journey I was taking of losing a lot of weight and then feeling really miserable and low in mood and low in energy. Where I thought, okay, this still isn't working for me, no matter how much, because I would binge and purge. So it was a form of bulimia. So no matter how much I binged and purged, I still would not lose the amount of weight I wanted to. I would still not look like the celebrity that I wanted to look like at that time. um, th- there was always different trends of different diets I would try and follow, but a GP wouldn't necessarily have diagnosed me with an eating disorder because I wouldn't engage with services. So for me, it's about, at the moment, it's about speaking with individuals who have experience but don't necessarily have family to take them for a diagnosis or haven't just necessarily wanted to engage with mental health services. So I think it's super important for, like you say, it's great that we're all talking more about mental health, whether it is about disordered eating, body image, anxiety, ADHD. It's amazing that we're having more conversations. But I think, as we were talking about before we came on air, although we want to sometimes have a diagnosis because it might help us access a service or additional support through school or work, it's not always all about that. I think sometimes pushing yourself for a label means that we're missing out on the actual experience of what it feels like to have, say, ADHD, or what it feels like to have body dysmorphic disorder. We sometimes miss that because we're looking to tick a box.
I signed up for a gym membership in junior year of high school, and I've been going every day since. And so it's been 10 years. I don't take days off. So I have body dysmorphia as well, too. I always wear big jackets all the time because I got made fun of really bad for being overweight. But it was just because I hadn't hit maturity. I hadn't hit that puberty, but I stopped eating and I was just eating an apple a day and living off that. And like I wasn't getting hungry a lot. It's really weird. I know the binge eating aspect. I necessarily don't have that. But when it comes to you need food to survive, but what food is enough food and which food is too much? And then like you start to realize that like, especially for the longest time, I think it's mostly been, especially with body image, it's very rare in men just because men haven't really been pressured, I would say, not really by society, but just haven't really been so obsessed. Usually if someone like you could say to a guy like, man, you need to lose weight, you're fat, but it's different. You can't really say that to a woman. Like even other ladies would make fun of each other or something, sure, but men kind of, that's a way to get into shape. It's like, hey man, you need to hit the gym or something like that. But the way society has been is like, especially with models, for instance, we're seeing plus size models now. We're seeing a bunch of aspects of things that never would have happened 10, 15 years ago. I mean, if I told you that actors had to sign a contract where they had to maintain a certain weight, that would sound crazy today if you told a kid that. But society has changed a little bit. In some aspects, it's good, but also there's aspects about it too where it's like you also don't want to like incentivize people to take up two seats on an airplane. Like there's a health risk factor you have to worry about as well too, but it's about finding a happy medium and finding a balance as well too. My particular thing that I really appreciate is that there's not really being a push towards, I would say, forcing someone to take a medication or forcing someone to be like, you need to take this or you need to go to this. It's like, yeah, they can go to a counselor. That's fine. But we don't need to medicate every single person and expect a pill because that's how you get like diet trend pills where they had like, take this green tea fat burner. Now, I work in the fitness industry. And if you look at the fitness industry, every single bodybuilder, every single one of these people that really work out for 3 or 4 hours, they all have some type of body dysmorphia or some type of aspect to them where they don't really look in the mirror and see what others see. They see something that's way more out of proportion than what they actually are. And I mean, it's a complicated relationship because I think a lot of it does play a factor of the way that we think people view us and the way that we care about how other people view us. Now, some people could say, I really don't care what other people think. Yeah, but I mean, subconsciously, do you feel that way really? And social media is the biggest advocate and pressing that gas pedal to make people really care about what other people think of them. I mean, look on Instagram. Do you see any pictures of any bad times, or you just see pictures of the good times? And I think it's hard for how we are so ingrained into our devices to really pull ourselves out and realize that's not reality. There's a bunch of things they had to do. They had to work their ass off to afford that Hawaii trip. They had to go to the gym to make sure that they could take that bikini picture. There's a lot of little mini steps, but we always see the end prize or the end reward. And that's a type of like social dysmorphia. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's almost, I know a lot of people use the term that, yeah, social media is like a highlight reel, where it is just a case of, well, now I've achieved this small milestone for me. Or like you say, I've got that trip to Hawaii. Stepping on stage as a bodybuilder at 7% body fat. But if, I suppose, in a way, because obviously social media is not all negative, although it has so many negative attributes because of the way we use it rather than necessarily the platform itself, and probably the way that the business model's designed to make it feed into this consumerist market, because it is a business. Although it's a communication tool, for us it is a business, and they are worth so much money because so many millions of us engage with their platforms. But I think that's maybe, for me anyway, as someone who spends quite a lot of time on social media for my project, but also to follow different people in the fitness industry because I find it just so intriguing. Um, Using different social media platforms, say like the likes of if you have bodybuilders that, yeah, they'll post certain workouts or their supplements or certain poses on Instagram. But if you say follow them on YouTube, you sometimes see some of those gaps of the real hard work that goes in, but that's still only a snapshot of their week that we're viewing. So although we feel like we're going along this journey with them, we're really not, because we don't see the days where maybe they can't get out of bed, or we don't see the days where they're standing possibly crying in the gym because they just don't have any more power to push their body in a workout, but they know they're going on stage, say in 3-4 weeks time, and they're hitting that sort of in between stage of, well, I've prepped my body to hit such a low body fat percentage, but I'm still not where I need to be to get that pro card or to get that recognition on the stage to move on to the next show. We don't always see that reality. And obviously, we're still in a transition into a post-COVID world. So we don't necessarily know what the impact's going to be. But I can only imagine, if we already have various psychological studies that tell us that there's a direct impact between general mental well-being and someone's social media use, say like their screen time, if there's a direct link behind that, I can only imagine how that must have impacted young people and adults during COVID, where we were potentially isolated away from family or only around certain members of our family or loved ones. So our phone was where we turned to, or social media to try and promote what we were doing or give ourselves a productive routine was what we turned to try and get us through that pandemic.
Do you think people will recognize that there's a problem though? Because I know some people that are like pro 100% social media, like some researchers, for instance. I talked to her name's Sonia Livingstone, who did a bunch of studies about social media and technology and saying it's actually beneficial, it's helpful for it is in some aspects if you use it that way. I just think there needs to be better education about it. What I've started to notice, I don't know if it's maybe because I'm getting older, but I started to give less of a crap about what people think compared to where like I mean, I still do 4 hours of cardio on the weekends and stuff like that, and then only consume like 90 calories. That's an issue I need to fix. But I mean, I enjoy it, but what the way I used to be is I hadn't gone out to eat in like 8 years because I worried so much about, those types of things. And that's the same thing with bodybuilding, for instance. But I'm seeing either it's with older generations or maybe just younger generations coming up. Are you seeing a shift in the way that they're viewing each other now? I'm seeing less kids that are younger going to the gym, mostly doing things that they feel like they need to do to get a successful life in a sense. Now, a lot of that does go to like Twitch streaming and other things, which might not maybe be a business aspect in the end, but it's a way of like you start realizing that they don't really care about the looks as much. They more care about how, like, personal, like actual physical features, but they more care about how other people view them as a good person, as a whatever you want to say. It's more about social status rather than an aspect of physical status.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think that's come alongside this influencer culture that we sort of see now, where we see so many individuals with such high numbers of following, mostly on the likes of TikTok or Instagram. And it's about how people perceive them, because there's also this balance of, you have to come across as a good person so that you don't have, so you have a big following, but you also, it's almost seen as a community, isn't it? So if you watch these people on social media, it's their community that they're taking along with them. So they talk to them or refer to them as their friends, as their people. Um, and I think there's also a massive fear around cancel culture and being cancelled for something that you say online. So it does shift that focus away from the physical aspect, because we can potentially, again, I don't know the numbers around this, but you could say that young people potentially think, well, I could filter that photo instead. Or we have seen a rise in cosmetic surgery and beauty treatments. So, well, I can have my facial features and my appearance altered. I need to focus on that perspective of other people, because if I come across as a good, nice individual, people will follow me and people will join my community.
I think if people recognize that, especially with cosmetic surgery, because I think everyone's thought about it, like maybe I can get this done or get. We all have one feature that we don't like about ourselves. I have freckles on my nose. That used to piss me off so bad when I was a kid. I used to try and take lemon juice and try and, because it makes them lighter, so you make them fade away or something like that. But once you start realizing that everyone kind of has one flaw that they really don't like about themselves, and they amplify it more in their brain. You probably have a flaw that you probably think about all the time, but I wouldn't notice it because I don't like, that's just, I'm not paying attention to something like that. But you're so focused in on it because you see it every single day. You know what that is. I mean, I'm not a big freckles fan, but I have freckles. I don't like them on myself, but I don't mind them on somebody else. Like you just have a trait about yourself that you're going to amplify in your own head. And then that pushes people to go to cosmetic surgery. Now, there's a point where it's like, if you have to get something repaired, then sure. But you see people now that like just get money and be like, I'm going to do this. It's something I wanted to do. It's like, did you want to do that? Or do you think people will like you more if you do that? Like, and you were mentioning before about the Snapchat filter thing. I mean, that's a big thing. They have these filters are just getting increasingly better at doing so much. Like, there's one that makes you cry, and it makes it like, that's a weird one and it's trending. And I'm like, that's really, really bad. If you're trying to, like, you could easily take something out of context. I thought my buddy was going through some severe pain or something, and I messaged him. He's like, dude, it's a filter. I'm like, what? And like, it's getting insane. I mean, face cropping, all this type of stuff is really getting advanced, which is kind of scary. I'm hoping that like more people, like especially younger kids coming up, aren't going to really take something away from that psychologically, and they're actually going to realize that like, you don't need to be like that. You don't need, I mean, changing your eyes to blue, clearing up your face. There's a filter that makes you like, what if your face was perfect? And it shows you, and all it does is add like a couple things to it. But it's like, you're already telling kids, or you're giving them the option to see what they would look like if they did something, which if they look better or if they look worse, depending on how they take it, could really impact their lives in the worst possible way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my concerns, and one thing that I've spoken to individuals that I've interviewed for my PhD so far has been around these almost, well, for me, unrealistic standards that these filters can set, because I don't think that young people realize that there will be 90, probably, I know this is an exact number, but for me, the majority of people you follow as influencers, particularly women, but also men too, will filter their photos, even if it's just, like you say, altering their skin tone ever so slightly so they look more contoured and more thin, making their lips slightly more plump, their nose slightly smaller, changing their features. It might be ever so subtly, so you wouldn't necessarily notice them looking too different in an unfiltered photo. But you would very rarely find an influencer's photo posted on their Instagram grid that's not filtered. So if a young person is looking at that photo and thinking, okay, I want to look like that, that is a goal, that's a goal set on an unrealistic expectation because it's not actually how that individual looks. And that's what concerns me, is actually how far will young people suffer with not being able to meet these expectations, because it's not just about that holiday or that 3-month trip to Dubai that someone's randomly took and they're sat at their office on a beachfront rather than in their home. It's not just about that. It's also about how that individual does look. And I think almost what I've found so far at the early stages of my study is that people are saying to me, they don't necessarily focus on weight stigma as much anymore, although they do feel the pressure of having a certain body, whether it is a man wanting to be more muscular or a woman wanting to have the curves of the Kardashians. So these are certain things that people are telling me of goals that they have. It's not as much that anymore, although that pressure is there. It is their facial features and how their face looks to other people rather than just their body. Because we do have a huge body positivity movement now of, like you say, we have plus size models. We have singers such as the likes of Lizzo is a huge character for body positivity, of a case of this is how I look and this is what I want to wear. If you don't like it, it's not my problem. We have had the likes of Adele, although she has lost a significant amount of weight. And you have different Melissa McCarthy, if we think of actresses or actors, where they aren't necessarily pushing to look like someone who is deemed as the ideal woman. But at the same time, they are also potentially filtering photos. They are also on diets behind the scenes that we don't see. We just see them promoting this body positivity. So it's almost trying to distinguish the reality of the online space to the offline space. And I think those boundaries are sometimes blurred of what's real and what's not.
Do you think it's like, here's an interesting thought, but do you think it's people caring so much about what everyone thinks of them, or what someone who might be someone that they like saying no to them on the basis of their looks? Like, just that, even that option. Like, the weird thing is what I started to notice was someone put up a picture that works at my gym, and they were like, did you know that it went from girls loving abs to girls actually love big backs? And then you see like the pictures and you're like it had over like 1 million something likes, and you're just like, okay, hold on a second. So the whole paradigm has shifted. I mean, if you look at old bodybuilders, for instance, they were not ripped at all, but that there was just a trend where they immediately became ripped. And then now we're at like the dad bod or something like that. Like, it's going in a different direction, which I start to look at like, is it people caring what other people think about them? Or is it people just hoping that if an opportunity comes up to where they find somebody that they really like, they won't be said no to?
I think it is more broad now, where it's what everyone thinks rather than a potential partner. Because like you say, there's conversations as well, similar to what we kind of said offline, about how where there might be a preference of someone without makeup. It's a similar to where if women are saying, oh well, no, a woman isn't interested in abs anymore, they're interested in a big back or a dad bod. It's similar to where there's conversations where women will go out dolled up to the nines with a lot of makeup on, or certain filler alongside their makeup. And you'd have conversations with males who would say, well, actually, that's not what I want. I want a girl who looks more natural. I want a girl who doesn't wear makeup, so I can see both sides, where you feel more comfortable, look more comfortable. It's still these very deeply ingrained idealistic versions of what a woman should be, because it's always been put out in the media. If you look at media representations of beautiful women, it's always a case of a full face of makeup, maybe a red lip, dress, heels, and a man, it's like kind of suited and booted, or if it's a topless photo with his abs. It's very historical, deeply ingrained ideals of what a man and a woman should be,
I mean,
that I don't think we've moved away from.
they made the Greek statues with abs and stuff, but they still had the one flaw where they all have small private
Yeah.
parts. But I'm just saying, like, I think especially if we look at I consider like there's a way to shift that to, instead of saying that's the requirement of society, but to shift it to be, these are just things that make you extra. extra. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean you have to have that extra. Like you can still be yourself without any of that, and you're still going to be attractive to someone. And that's 100%. That's not a society thing. That's a to someone out there, they're going to find you attractive, but people feel like they need to add more. But instead, they look at the more as a requirement of what they must do before they go out. And I go, we just need to switch it to where it's seen as extra. Like you're doing extra, like you don't have to do that. You can just go. Like for me, if I'm in a relationship and they're taking an hour and a half to get ready, that's going to piss me off more than it doesn't matter how beautiful you look. You know what I mean? I'd rather just be able to go out into the world and not have to worry about, you know, either time taking too long or something like that, which I'll give you time. I'll give you time to do whatever. But it's just an aspect of like, if you're that focused on your looks, are you really even enjoying the moment that you're in? Like it's a weird kind of like inner conflict that people have where I just try and tell people, I'm like, if you like, once you get that sweatpants confidence where you can go to the store in sweatpants and not care, and you see it in relationships. When people are in relationships, they kind of drop the whole, this is how I have to be, this is how this, it's kind of like you become more comfortable. You just need to not only be more comfortable with yourself, but be more comfortable just with the world around you. Someone that you meet at the store, once you start realizing is that you're probably never going to see them again, that one little 5-second interaction doesn't need to stay up in your head. Like you don't need to constantly think about like, oh my God, that guy, the person, he saw me. You don't need to think about it like that. But I think with the younger generations, especially coming up now, there's a whole shift. I bet you'll start to see like more actual like relationships. I know so many kids, like my little nephews and cousins that are like just graduating high school and stuff. They've been in relationships for like 3-4 years. I'm like, that was not like that like 5-10 years ago. There was a whole like OnlyFans site. Well, not even just OnlyFans, but Tinder, all these different apps where you could just go around and do whatever you want as free as you want to be. Now it's like actual, like you're seeing, like it's weird. It's kind of like how my grandparents were, where they were like married for 70 something years. And it's like, are these people actually getting in relationships that they're going to be in for a very extremely long time? Maybe it's a culture shift. I have no.
That's interesting because obviously we're on different sides of the world. And we, from what I see, I've got, say, cousins, a couple of cousins of very similar age, and they are not engaging in relationships at all. And that's just a case of they are very much in the sort of culture of, well, no, I want to work on me. I'm only really young. And I'm thinking it's sort of 14, 15-year-olds. Wow, I didn't even have that mindset of relationships or working on me. I was just a teenager. I was just living day by day, seeing where I was going with my friends the next day after school. Whereas the likes of Tinder, OnlyFans, we have a couple of other different dating sites like Hinge or Bumble, where they are so popular in individuals of, say, like teens, but also 20s, and beyond, where you're seeing a lot more popularity in people maybe shorter term relationships or just not getting into relationships. But for me, and I haven't done research around this, but I often wonder if we spend so much time and put so much effort into our social media, is that almost not a relationship with your online followers? And maybe that's where that discomfort comes from of how you have to look offline, because if you bumped into someone who followed you online and you bumped into them, say in the supermarket or at a bar, you might want to make sure that you're living up to that standard and that precedence that you're setting online. Because you do hear a lot more of say higher divorce rates in the UK, and individuals not being married for 50, 60, 70 years. So it's possibly that might be a difference that we're seeing in both of our sort of home countries.
Well, even with social media, I think it just gives people this idea that they have more options or they have this obtainable thing. Like if they see, like if they're about to get married or something, they see someone online, they like that person, they find attractive. Doesn't mean you don't find your partner attractive. It just means that you just, something just piqued your eyes or something like that, which we all, I think everyone looks or does something like that. They don't just like go and like just chase after them. But for a lot of people, they're like, wait, I could get this. And they have this like scenario that plays in their head. It's like, no, you can't. That person is probably going to say no to you, but they think that they can obtain it. And next thing you know, they end in a relationship or something like that. It wasn't like that back in the day, at least with grandparents, for instance, because my grandparents, they're married for 70 years. There was no social media to be able to, you had to go to town. And most of the time you were in a relationship. So you were trying not to get caught looking or something of that sort. But now you have a device where you can sit in the middle of the night or whatever and scroll while the other person's asleep. And then you're coming across all these things where you feel like I could be in this. And then you start playing a scenario in your head. The only value I see that's the same is when it comes to being in a relationship. Like there's a lot more of sorting that out now. I think when I was in high school, it was a lot more of just go have your fun. And especially over here, like now I'm seeing just younger kids, like they're dating from like middle school and they're staying together. And even when they graduate and go off to college, they're still together. And usually that was like a rare couple. Like you would see maybe a friend or so would be in this long-term relationship. Now it's becoming like very, very more normal in some aspects. And I'm like, this is interesting to see. It's like, are you hopefully going to stay together? Or is it going to be like when you turn 30, you realize you didn't have any fun times? It's that recognition of the fun times. But that's the same thing when you graduate high school. You get graduation goggles, you graduate, you think, man, I really missed high school. No, you didn't. You don't miss it. You're just not involved in the everyday abuse because now you're older and you've been so disconnected from it. But people have like this, that's partially our memories. I think our memories, like they imprint or they maybe falsify some things to make you feel like you actually had a better time than you actually did. And you get involved in it again. You're like, oh my God, I realize how it's relationships too. People remember the good times about a relationship and then they get back into, they're like, oh my God, I realize why we ended this. Like it's horrible. It's like, yeah, it's that memory aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Because although our brains are programmed to remember or deal with trauma to a certain degree, they're also trained to like suppress trauma so that we do remember the happier times. So like you say, whether it comes to a relationship where you just remember those happier times until you're back into it and think, oh my God, what have I done? I remember exactly why I've left now. But also in terms of those sort of memories that you have with friends, if you have, again, if we're linking this to social media, if there's say been a bust up in the family or a bust up with a friend or with a partner, and you say walk away from that situation, when you're reminiscing on those good times, all you see, if you're flicking through say like the memories that come up on our Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, whatever platforms we use, our memories always come back up. And like we said before, because we're not posting those terrible times, all we then physically see in front of us, as well as our actual imprinted memories, are the good times and thinking, oh, maybe I should reach out to that person again. Or if they reach out to you, you're only reminiscing on those really present, happy memories with that person.
Well, what would do you think this is going to be something that's just going to work its way out? Or do you think this is just something that's always going to linger because it's always kind of been a part of our society? I think it's definitely ramped up because of social media. And I do not see technology slowing down to a point where it's going to be able to be like, oh, people can just like, hop off the devices. I think there was some of that, especially after the pandemic. A lot of people are like, I spent too much time on my computer. I'm going to like try and live life and enjoy, not being inside my house anymore. But then we kind of fallen back into a sense of going back into our old routines. And I go, even if you try to disconnect, like I on social media just post and ghost. I just put up one post a day and I hop off of it. It's not that it's like bad or anything. It's just that it becomes like when you start worrying about your follower count. And I know people that I work with that have a specific Instagram profile where they just put up pictures of their ass and they get a bunch of likes. And I go, that's just going to make you go even more personalized into your looks where you're going to really care because now you feel like your followers will be let down if you don't. And it's like that's when you got to start realizing that there's an issue there. So I don't see, maybe it's the shift of tides when it comes to social media or when it comes to society. It seems like we're progressing forward in some sense when it comes to just recognition that there is a lot more disorders out there. There's a lot more, ADHD was not recognized before. They just called you mentally challenged when I was a kid and they lock you in a room and forget to feed you sometimes. That's true too. But when it comes to the way that I think people not only are more empathetic in some aspects when it comes to mental health disorders, you're also having just I guess a realization as well too that it is not real. Like this social media aspect, it's not real. Like people are aware of that subconsciously, but it's about making sure that they pay attention to that. Because I feel like a lot of times you get lost in your follower count, you get lost in your likes, you get lost in so many things. But even when they put their phone down, when they're like walking around in the world, I don't think they're really thinking about their followers a whole lot. Hopefully they're not, but maybe.
No, I don't think so. I do think it is, they're not thinking about the followers. I do think that thinking about how they come across to other people. But I think like everything in our society, it's going to be just one of these things that we have to just adapt to, because like you say, technology overall, not just social media, technology has such a handle over us, and it's involved in everything we do. And I think that, especially when we are still living in a time where it's great because we can make connections with people that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to before. So say if it wasn't for technology, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, because we live on totally different sides of the world. So it has its great attributes that I think we are really seeing people make the most of since COVID. So since the pandemic, people are meeting with people on Teams, on Zoom, are hosting conferences, which I think are super important around this area to share research, so that we aren't just stuck in our little bubble of a few universities or a few research centres based around us in our own country. I think it needs to be an international approach that we take to helping people, and also educating people on social media. So I know in the UK, and obviously it could be different over your side of the world, where in the UK at the moment, the government are working on education plans around health, around social media, around relationships, and making sure that everything's adapted to the 21st century, so that it's not just the basic sex education, and it's not just the basic, here's what your 5 a day looks like, and here's what your proteins are for your health and nutrition in schools. But they're also looking at in reducing legislation that should hopefully feed in a kind of a transnational approach to online safety and being able to regulate the social media spaces. I don't think that's going to be an easy task. And I don't think we're necessarily going to see a solution maybe in the next 10 to 15 years that's actually effective, because it is forever changing. I mean, I'm so immersed into social media because of my doctoral research, but a new platform crops up, or a new feature of a platform crops up, and I'm like, I can't keep up because there's so much.
Yeah. Well, I think we were lucky in the way that Tinder and all those apps kind of worked out. Now, people still use them, but it could have gotten a hell of a lot worse with how invested people got into these things as well, too. I don't really know a whole lot of people that got the super like aspect of Tinder or any of these dating apps. That stuff you have to pay for. I think a lot of people stop there. They're like, I'm not paying for that. It could have got worse where people really became invested. I mean, dating is going to go online, but I mean, we could have gotten it to the point where it's going to be this aspect of like, it's just going to keep getting deeper and deeper. The one thing though, is when we talk about body shaming or we talk about this, it has to be done effectively. It has to be done positively, because in the US, it has completely gone the wrong way, because now they do not educate you on what foods you should be eating, because that is technically considered body shaming. They dropped the pyramid. They dropped all that stuff. I have not seen any of that. And it's an issue. I've talked to researchers who are nutritionists here, and they do talk about like it's very, very difficult, because you want to give someone a proper plan. But if you're in a school teaching it, you can't just do that, because some kid could take that the wrong way of you're telling them that they need to eat this or they need to force them. And it's like, that's not really what they're doing. They're kind of just telling you like your body does need proteins, your body does need carbohydrates, but it's just how things become, because it's like making up for lost time. If there's so long that this has not been completely recognized, or there hasn't been like an idea of like you need to worry about men's mental health, now there's a whole society that's ramping up as hard as they can to fix all that time that's been lost, which I'm pro advocate for mental health in every aspect, whether it's men, female, or whatever. But it has to be done effectively. Like, does that mean that every single guy needs to, as soon as they scrape their knee, you need to say like, are you okay? Do you need a psychiatrist? Do you need any of this? No, but you should ask them like, you good? Cool. And it's just a recognition that, yes, you understand what either this person's going through, or you understand something like this. I think I had a guest on, Michael Ravito. He told me 65 men are more likely to kill themselves or be more successful at it, 65% than females are. And then you start bringing up all these aspects of society. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to only take care of men now. We got to take care of both. It's not that. It's a human aspect. It's when someone, you recognize when someone is in pain and you can address it, but understand the severity of pain as well, too. If someone lost their dad, everyone, I think, knows that you need to be there and talk to that person. But if someone just, like, I don't know, like got flicked off at a red light, person's going to be upset, but does that mean that they need to sit down and talk about their feelings for 45 minutes? Probably not, unless that person's going through already a lot. Then maybe so. But I think when we do things in anything in society, we do have this kind of make up for lost time aspect, which means that you need to go 100% into it. And I go, just make a cautious and empathetic decision. Like, recognize the situation that you're in first, and then make your decision based upon that. I think common sense will tell you what the right choice is.
Yeah, I totally agree, because it's almost, and we're the same in the UK, where we're constantly, it's as if we're putting changes into place to fight fires rather than to prevent them from happening. So it's so interesting that you say about how the US has kind of gone in a different direction of where you can't teach anyone about different types of food and what would fuel your body and what wouldn't, because it would be classed as body shaming. Because we've introduced a really very new, in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I want to say, the time that we're recording this, really new strategy in the UK, which is seen to be part of our obesity strategy. But it's where now, if a restaurant can serve a certain amount, or a cafe can serve drinks or food to a certain amount of individuals, and I believe the number sits at around about 250 people, but I don't believe that's at one time. I think it's maybe across, say, like a week or a day. Then that provider or drinks provider has to provide the calories within that food. So this has been a huge controversial debate in the UK since before it was actually introduced, when the discussions were taking place with government, to now, because you've got a party of individuals who are saying, this is an atrocity, this is horrendous, this is going to influence disordered eating, this is going to make people, like, really trigger people who have eating disorders, because they can't even go and get a cup of coffee without having to see the calories. And you have other individuals who are saying, well, actually, no, this is a good thing, because if someone is obese, or if, say, someone does have an eating disorder where they are too nervous to go and get a coffee, or they're sat in an Italian restaurant, for example, and they pick a salad because they think that's less calories, when actually they could have a pasta for the same amount, it could really support people. So there's a huge debate going on at the moment as to whether this is a form of body shaming, and whether it's actually an effective strategy for the UK to be taken.
See, that reminds me of every day at a high school, I would go to Starbucks and I would get a Java chip, a venti Java chip. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's basically a
No.
bag of chocolate chips and chocolate syrup grounded up into a coffee. It's a milkshake basically. But I was like, around this time they started putting calories on the board, and they put it up there, and I look up, I go, there's 1,500 calories in a venti Java chip. And I'm like, that's more than, that's almost your daily serving amount. It's supposed to be 2,000 if you're on a diet. And it's like, holy crap, from one drink. I was like, I'm not drinking that anymore. There's just not enough education. If we put up the calorie thing, you can't just do that. What you have to do is you have to show that there's good calories and there's bad calories. 800 in a fast food cheeseburger is not the same as 800 in a salad. The number is the same, but the beneficial part aspect that you're getting from the salad is way better for your body, and it's not the exact same as eating a fast food burger of 800 calories. There's never that. My worst, I guess, mistake in life was checking the back of the calorie nutrition label when I first started working out, because now I do it on every single thing I touch. Now I just eat the same foods where I know how many calories I'm consuming. But I always recommend to people, I was like, do you want to work out because you want to work out, or do you want to work out because you think you need to work out? And they go, well, I want to look good in my swimsuit. I'm like, then don't do it. Don't do it. If that's why you're doing it, if you're not doing it to make feel better, if you're not doing it to do this, then you're just going to go down a really dark path. And I go, when you check your food, I go, don't even look at like what food has less calories. Just eat good foods. Celery, it has 25 calories a stick. Like I can name you so many different foods that I could tell you the exact calorie count on those things, only because that's all I do now. It's a very, very bad habit to get involved in. And I think that is partially not just in America, but other countries as well too. The nutrition aspect of things didn't pick up until like 2010, 2009, I think. And then even then we didn't do it effectively. Did you know the sugar industry paid doctors $50,000 to blend their studies and teach people that fat was actually bad for you when really it was sugar? It messed up society for the longest time, and we're still dealing with that. Now people realize, oh, there's good fats and there's bad fats. Yeah, like fat doesn't make you fat. There's good stuff out there. There just needs to be proper education in this aspect, but especially over here, it's became an aspect you can't even talk about now because we don't want someone to get the wrong feeling or take it the wrong way, which I've talked to a lot of people and I start to realize like if I say something that might be jokingly, they might take it the wrong way because of an experience that they had. And now it's just a safe bet when you're teaching this as a class to just not even really talk about like you need to do this or these are the proper nutrients for your body. Just say, you want to eat enough and you don't want to eat not enough. And that's it. And it's like, well, that's nothing for a kid. They're going to go out into the store and be like, well, what's enough? Is it when I get full, or if I'm still kind of hungry and I don't wait, can I still eat more?
Yeah, I agree, but I would go one step further and I would argue that a whole part of the education is to try and, or a starting point for it is to try and move away from labels such as healthy and unhealthy, good and bad, and say, look, like, yes, like you say, we can't just stop at a calorie because, like, we know I could go and get, like you say, a Big Mac from McDonald's that, and the whole meal would say be 1100 calories. Whereas realistically, actually, and I'm just using that number because I know that the protein yogurt I had for breakfast, my lunch, and my tea are coming to 1100 calories without any snacks or if I bulk anything out during the day. The basics of my meals today, which will be three basic, decent size for me meals, is 1100 calories. That is going to be so much more nutritionally dense and so much better for my body to feel fueled, to feel full, to feel better and more energetic than if I go and get a Big Mac and chips and a Diet Coke from McDonald's. So although, like you say, you can have a lot more food by making better choices and more educated choices around actually, well, I could use those 1100 calories to split across 3, 4 meals if I wanted to, depending on what portion size I'm eating. And I'll feel more fulfilled. So I would argue that we need to also try and move away from using words like healthy, unhealthy, good or bad to say, well, actually, yeah, you know what? If you want to have a cheeseburger, have a cheeseburger. It's not, you don't need to starve yourself the next day. We shouldn't have cheat meals and clean meals. It's just a meal, but it's about making educated choices. So teach people about how actually, I do this with my partner. He can't get his head around how if I prep a meal that has beef mince with rice, that it looks smaller for the same amount of calories than chicken or turkey with rice. And I'll try and explain, actually, if you break down the macros, there's more fat, there's more of the micronutrients in beef versus chicken. So you can have more white meat for, say, 150 calories than you can red meat. And it's breaking down the actual education side of nutrition rather than just saying, here's a healthy, balanced diet, or here's good food, here's bad food. Don't eat this, eat that. Unless you're an athlete or you're a bodybuilder and you need to be eating certain foods to actually get your body to respond in the best way possible, if that makes sense.
I agree with you, but I also bring up a point where it comes to you don't want people to think that McDonald's is just the same as something else. You
Oh,
need
yeah.
that does need to be deemed as unhealthy because that is what that is. That is, it's not really food. I mean, there's a difference between like I get your aspect where I've heard this too, where it's you eat a cheeseburger, that was an unhealthy food, so that means today I can't eat. That's an important issue that a lot of people probably do and experience. That needs to be addressed. But I also think there's a difference between that type of cheeseburger and a McDonald's cheeseburger when we
Yeah,
talk about
it's
the fast food
processed
part.
versus
Yeah.
whole foods, isn't it?
That's just that's like I don't want, because if we don't address that that is a very unhealthy portion, then you have a lot of people that think that they can just eat McDonald's every single day, and that's not even just on a time crunch aspect. That's a whole nother factor that goes in. How many people stop at a fast food place and want to order a salad? More likely than not, if they're eating at some type of fast food place, they're going to get the cheapest option, and that's going to be a double cheeseburger or some type of chicken nuggets, and they show you the calories on the board, and they'll show you it's the same exact as a salad or something, but the pricing is completely different. I mean, Taco Bell is probably one of the healthier options of fast food if you're going to get it, only because they actually put like lettuce in your food. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Unless you're getting like a specific burger that has that, most of the time they don't come with that. It just brings you the patty. I think there needs to be something taught with like a better education about not only where our food comes from, but also the types of food that they use. If it's a frozen beef patty, what is that patty made out of? So maybe you could take the unhealthy aspect out of it, but it would be the same labeling as like GMOs. People, once that word GMO was introduced, or organic, for instance, when they heard the word organic, they thought immediately, this is healthier. It's like, well, it's kind of the same thing. It's really just the method of how they grow it. It's a little bit different. They don't add the chemicals. So if you can kind of get this aspect of maybe taking out the unhealthy and healthy option with a more chemical kind of thought process that comes into it, which is like this food from McDonald's, you don't have to call it unhealthy, which it might be, but you can just say it's made with a little bit of a different process, which actually is not the best for you compared to if you get a normal cheeseburger.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like you say, it's that process element of actually, yeah, okay, it could be British beef in the beef burger from
What is
McDonald's,
British
but you don't
beef?
know what else is in there. That's how they promote it in the UK. It's whole British beef so that it's not the random bits of kind of the animal. Um, but actually you don't know what else is in your food. Like you say, you don't know what oils it's cooked in, you don't know what chemicals are involved. But it's just like it's breaking down myths of diets as well. So say there's a huge argument in the, well, it's all over kind of social media. There's Netflix documentaries on it, so it'll be relevant in the US as well as the UK, of how vegan, like alternative veganism, how veganism's great for you. Actually, although for some people it really works, and yeah, you might be having more vegetables and you might be having more whole kind of legumes and food. Actually, a lot of vegan meat alternatives are very processed and don't break down very well in the body because it's processed food. It's not, I know some vegans or vegetarians who eat a lot of meat alternatives rather than lentils, beans, vegetables. So realistically, even whether they ate a chicken breast or a meat alternative, the chicken breast would possibly digest better in their system than a meat alternative to a pulled pork burger
Yeah.
that you don't necessarily know what's in it.
Well, some people like, especially with diet trends, is the weirdest one because, like, even with Adkins' diet, that was really, really big. That guy died by slipping and falling on ice and cracking his head open. Like, nobody like realizes that dude scammed out so many people, and then people go like, people still believe like carbs is one thing. There are good carbs and there are bad carbs that you need to know about. There's carbs that give you energy, and there's carbs that'll make you go to sleep, like eating a pasta dinner. But the only vegan argument that I've ever really heard was that is better for the environment. And I go, if you really check the vegan, like the charts that they bring up, they're comparing it to like cows. If you have less cows, it'll reduce carbon emissions or something, or methane emissions or something like that. And I go, do you see what they're comparing it to on the graph though? It's like to a person riding their bike or to some other a person walking, it's going to be lower. It's like, yeah, but what about an oil factory, or what about something that's literally spewing black smoke? It's like the argument, you start to realize it kind of falls apart. But a lot of people hop on the vegan trend because they see this idea of saving the earth in that aspect. And in some cases, there might be that point, but not everybody can do a vegan diet. If it works for you, it works for you. But there are some people that like get such low energy that they pass out because they haven't eaten enough. If you look up the hashtag vegan cat, My buddy's a vegan, so I can kind of yell at him about this as well too. But hashtag vegan cat. It's people that feed their cat a vegan diet. Their cat dies at 3 or 4 years old. Their eye goes like white, like how Bill Cosby's eye goes white and like the one side of it, because they're meat eaters. They need meat. They need that processed protein that's in meat, and they can't survive off the diet. And it's like, you got to understand, the one thing out of this whole conversation, that kind of the theme is, recognize when something is good for you and recognize when something is bad for you. The only person that knows your body is you. It's not a doctor. It's not any of these. Now, they can give you advice on where maybe a method that might work for you, but you can't accept a diet trend that's not your own. This is why, like, I used to be so against like natural medicines and stuff. I still kind of am, but what I've separated from natural medicines is personalized medicine. You need to really focus on, make sure that the person that you're taking advice from or where you're getting your information from, you're going to know it better than anybody else will. You're going to know how your body reacts. Try some food. If it doesn't work for you, move on to something different. Just because society or the way that this diet works is by doing keto, you need to do this. Now, that doesn't mean you need to eat specifically what someone else eats. Find what works for you. I don't like sweet potatoes, so I don't eat sweet potatoes. I don't really like rice. I don't eat rice, but I like beans. I like other types of, I don't eat meat. I don't even eat vegan food. I eat like other fish and stuff. So you get to this aspect of like, just find what works for you. That's the takeaway. That education instilled on younger generations is going to fix a lot of freaking issues.
Yeah, it literally, it all falls back to educating people from a younger age, though. And I suppose that's the chicken and the egg argument of who do you educate first? Do you educate the parents or the young people? But I totally agree. I've had, so off the back of having disordered eating, I've had so many gut problems where I had to go to a dietitian who told me to cut out everything, go down the vegan route, eat. I was very restricted in what I could eat because I was on a what they call a low Fodmap diet. But I was on that instead of what would have been the recommended up to 12 weeks. I was on that for 2 years because it was never reviewed. And actually, what I found was I had more stomach problems and was having to turn to medicine more than ever until I just started to educate myself around macronutrients, micronutrients, what helped my digestion, what bloated me, so what my body just didn't enjoy eating. And actually, I transitioned to just eating fish and not eating meat because I was still I was too nervous to eat meat, as if the doctor had kind of totally scared me away from it, as well as other reasons. And I actually found that by educating myself of the types of foods that work for me and don't, I eat pretty much whatever I want now. And I'm not on any medication. I don't struggle with any kind of low fatigue or like low mood, whereas I would when I ate certain foods previously. Don't get me wrong, if I have a takeaway, I've gone out for a meal for a celebration, I know that I'm gonna feel pretty shit.
Yeah.
But I know I'm aware of that, and I'm making that informed choice that, okay, I'm gonna go and have a drink. I'm going out for drinks, so I'm going out for a meal. So I'm probably gonna feel pretty shitty tomorrow, but that's okay because I'm in control of that situation. I don't do it very often, and I know how my body's gonna respond. So I also know how to pull it back.
When you
But
said
like you say, people don't know that about their own bodies.
when you said that, it does it rely like on the chicken and the egg argument? Does it rely on the parents or does it rely on the kids? Do you think it's just not going to be people of our generation? Like, how old are you? You're probably in your 20s, right?
Yeah, I'm 26.
Okay, so you're not that much older than I am, but it's going to be our generation that's going to be the people. Because like I just went the other day with my little nephews who are like 4 and 2, and I went with which my brother and that's his kids. We went to a goat farm, and they're eating out of acai bowls or whatever it's called. I have never heard of that word in my entire life. They're like, it's a super berry. I'm like, how do you know? How do you know? Who's telling you that? The person that's selling you it? But they're eating like these amazing, like little small little fruit bowls that look delicious, like bananas in it and like these berries are in it, but it looks like chocolate. So they really enjoy it because they think they're eating like an ice cream. And I'm like, it's going to be that generation. It's going to be our generation that's going to completely just want to do this more whole food type aspect of making sure you understand. Because I think we were a good introduction to the program of teaching about nutrients. And then especially with a lot of like people recognizing that this generation and younger generations are having these types of disorders. There's a lot more knowledge instilled upon us. For me, I got most of my experience from working in a gym and going through this on my own. You got most of your experience from going through a more personal experience as well too. That's only going to affect your kids, and then your kids aren't going to have to go through that personal experience, but are still going to have the knowledge. So I think this is something that's going to take maybe a generation or so. It's going to work its way out, and then you're going to see a lot younger. I mean, back in the day, they didn't have a lot of options. My grandpa was raised in like the Great Depression. So like he was born in the 20s. So like, yeah, you ate what you ate and you make sure you suck the chicken off the bone. Basically, if you eat the bone, it's good for you because you had to use all you possibly could. So there wasn't this whole aspect of like, oh, you can save that food for later. You had an aspect of you need to sit there and eat everything on your plate. I was raised on that in some sense as well too. But then there's now more recognition of like, yeah, just whatever you're feeling. Like it doesn't need to be like, it's okay. It's okay every 2 seconds, but whatever you're feeling, if you're full, you're full. Like I remember I used to give my nephew a high five. And this is where I say it can go a little too far. And he was like, no, I'm good. No, I'm good. No, I'm good. I was like, give me a high five. Give me a high five. Like I'm joking. And his mom was like, no, he doesn't have to if he doesn't want to. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. I'm like, well, hold on. Be careful with that because you're now teaching him that this is a danger as someone that could be mugging him in an alley could be a danger like that. You have to be very, very careful with the way that, because you a lot of times you only see one side of the picture. But if you realize what the long game is, especially when it comes to a kid, if treating a high five as a danger is not the same danger as someone mugging you or someone making maybe attacking you or something like that. It needs to be recognized as that. If it's a joke or something like that, it should be taught that. It's kind of like with masks, for instance. A lot of people were afraid that masks were going to cut off that facial recognition that little kids were going to develop. It's like that as well, too. It's the words we say. Now, you can say something, spell something. If you say Christmas or you spell Christmas, it's different because they're not really recognizing maybe to put the words together. But you have to make sure that when you're conveying something, that they get the full extent of what you're conveying, not accidentally like a half-ass explanation that they end up misunderstanding and then take the wrong aspect of it into later adulthood.
Yeah, absolutely. Because although they don't necessarily make those connections for themselves, we know from so much research that early year experiences from kind of any age under the age of 10 really shape the way a young person interprets the world and the way that they view the world. And I totally agree that it's going to be our generation and possibly our kids' generation that are going to be implementing these changes around social media, around body image, around educating young people around relationships, food, training, and the real, although we talk about the benefit of exercise, again, exercise and the, whether it's cardio or lifting weights or CrossFit or F45, these different types of training come in trends. It's not just what's good for you or what you enjoy, although I do believe we are moving in the world of it's whatever you enjoy, just move your body, whatever makes you feel good. I do think it also comes in trends the way that nutrition does. So if you see someone that you follow online doing CrossFit, okay, I'm going to go and do CrossFit. I'm going to do that specific workout, even though I don't really know how to do a snatch or I don't know how to do a power clean. I'm going to give it a go, and you could end up injured. Or you see someone doing kind of training for a marathon, but you don't know they're training for a marathon. You just see how many runs they're doing a week and think, oh, I'm going to run that far. And you don't have the education behind why you're doing it or why that's good for your body.
How do you feel about Fitbits?
See, I love them.
Oh,
I don't wear a
no.
Fitbit. I wear an Apple Watch. So it's
Okay.
pretty much the same thing, isn't it? I love it, but I don't live through it. I think there's a difference.
Yeah.
I like being very aware of the fact that it's mostly if I'm working towards a goal. So say for me, I went on holiday 3 or 4 weeks ago. So leading up to that, I knew that I wanted to feel as good as possible. It wasn't about a number on the scale. It wasn't about necessarily how many calories I was taking in. It was about the fact I wanted to feel good on my holiday. So I knew I just needed to move a bit more. I do at this time of the year, I spend a lot of time in front of the computer, not lecturing in front of a lecture theatre because teaching's done for the year. So I'm marking assignments or I'm recording podcasts or I'm writing papers and doing research. So I know I need to make a conscious effort of moving around so I don't get lethargic and say hit 2,000 steps in a day and just not have moved and then be too tired to kind of go to the gym on a night time. So I like knowing that I've moved a certain amount. I don't then torture myself if I haven't hit a certain amount of steps on a night time and pace the house until I have, or take myself out for a walk, or I don't not leave the gym until I've burned 300 calories, for example. It's just there for me to be able to monitor for myself.
Yeah, that's the point I was going to bring up is like you want to it helps definitely on with a Fitbit or tracking, your steps or something to help you get more motivated to do more steps. But also like I remember I was in Hawaii one time on vacation and I was walking back to the hotel with someone and they stopped and they go, "I can't go in yet. I have to go. I'll do a couple laps around the building. I got to get my steps in." And I'm like, "What?" Like that's not you don't want to be like if you have the energy, sure. But if it's just because you're counting your steps and you feel like that's the measure of success that you're going to have for the day, that's a really, really weird route to get dived down into. And that's people become health obsessed. I mean, there's sleep apps that'll do the same thing, that'll track and let you know if you farted in the middle of the night or if you snored in the middle of the night, or maybe you need to do this. I'm like, you want to be health conscious, but you don't want to be so focused on it where you can't live your freaking life.
Yeah, I think that's online diet culture has stepped in though, where social media has made a an awful arena for diet culture. I don't like it. I personally don't find it useful watching someone tell me that, if you haven't done this certain morning routine, you're not going to have a successful day. If you haven't hit this many steps, you're not going to lose fat. Or if you haven't hit the Stairmaster for 20 minutes, it's not really cardio in the gym. I'm just not for that. I don't, it does probably trigger me a little bit. It makes me really agitated. I think we've seen, for me and for people I've spoken to in my study, me, and it's mostly women rather than men, which it's probably more so the algorithms on social media than anything else, and also the types of content we sort of engage with or search for. So I've seen so much, but such an increase in productivity to-do lists on social media, or certain workouts that you have to do to snatch your waist, or that you have to do to get a big bum. And it's like, no, I don't have to do that. I just have to do what works for me. I don't need someone ramming it down my throat as I'm scrolling through social media to tell me what works for me and what doesn't.
That's very, very true. It's a common thing with trainers. They'll usually tell you is that like, I'm going to give you a personalized plan rather than one that you're going to see. I mean, articles are helpful to get like an exercise that you might like, but it doesn't mean that's what you're going to get out of it. A lot of that does boil down into genetics as well, too. I wish people would realize. I know so many people that are like, I'm going to get shredded in that six pack. It's like, actually, you could get a six pack. Doesn't mean you can't get one. It just means that it's not going to look the exact same as that person. I think if you look up like different variations of six packs, there's like you'll see it in some bodybuilders. They'll have the actual like, genetic, not genetic, aesthetic six pack that you see in a movie. But then there's other variations of it where they actually have stronger middle parts rather than the top parts. And it's like you just got to pay attention. It's like it's the same thing. It's just you're not there's some aspects, so you can't just grow another bone and you can't grow another muscle where there isn't a muscle there. It's got to be some aspect of like you're going to obtain it how you obtain it. It's not going to be the exact same as somebody else.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same as when we were talking about the foods that respond better to some people than others, or just a generic diet to people's weight loss or weight gain, or body recomposition overall. Like, two people's journeys with that is never going to be identical. So what works for me may not work for my best friend who I train with. We follow the same ish training program, but it's a case of that's because we enjoy training together. It's not because we're going for the same aesthetic as one another. We have similar-ish goals, but we're never going to look the same, because just because we've hit a certain weight on a squat, or we do a certain amount of cardio a week, doesn't mean that our bodies are going to change the same, because like you say, everyone's receptive in different ways. But certain videos of individuals who aren't nutritionists or who aren't personal trainers, and they don't have these qualifications, so they don't necessarily know the science or the anatomy behind it, they might post these videos online without actually the education behind the certain workouts or behind the certain diets.
Well, Lauren, it's been a pleasure talking with you. We've been talking for a little bit. Is there a place where people can find any of your links? Seriously, it was a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much for having me. I mean, I'm on Twitter, although I'm trying to use it more. I'm not very good at posting on there. I'm getting better. So my Twitter link is Lauren Doyle, but instead of the A in Lauren, it's a 4, and instead of the O in Doyle, it's a 0. So it's nice and easy. Other than that, you can find me on obviously the University of Sunderland website. We all have staff profiles of the types of research we're doing, the things we're working on. So you can find me on there as well.
Well, I'll link it all in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.